You notice it's not on record.
Yeah.
A sound check. Just
One,
speak to them rather
two,
than
three,
continue.
four. Hello. Good afternoon. Looking forward to this. I hope we'll have a good interactive time. I'm good, floor manager? Very good. Ready to go. All right.
So this is just your presentation to the class. Then we will break and ask questions. So
Excellent,
welcome.
excellent. Thank you. I look very forward to your questions, as a matter of fact. When my wife asked me to appear today and speak to you, which she did months ago, I've been working very hard to figure out what's a relevant conversation to have with you. Not only something that's interesting, but something that you can take away an important message with, and somehow, if not now, incorporate in your life at some time in the future. So while I was busy writing, War and Peace and the New Bible, Valerie says, no, just keep it simple. Just do what you do as a futurist. Now, what's a futurist? That's a title that was bestowed upon me by a good friend of mine who's quite a prolific writer and author, Michael Eric Dyson. And I was one who was always speaking of not next year, not 5 years from now, but 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, because you have to know where you're going to know how to manage where you are today so you get there. So if you don't have a vision, if you've not selected a road to walk down in terms of your life, well, any road will lead you there. And when you arrive, you don't know how you got there, and you won't know how to get back. So planning is very, very important. To plan, even if it's the wrong plan, to find that out. But don't just wing it. So when we talk today, I thought about reinventing oneself. And those are my remarks today. I'm going to break them into two very different areas of conversation, but they'll merge at the end of my comments. The first is reinventing yourself. That's the process of knowing that where you go, who you are, you can always evolve. And the person you were yesterday isn't the person you have to be today. You can constantly identify who you are, what you like, where you came from, what you're made of, what's your vision, and change that as frequently as you like. So I always like to say, you are not your circumstances. You may have been born into poverty, but you're not impoverished. You may not have been born the smartest person in the world, but it doesn't make you the dumbest person in the world. You can always change those circumstances by reinventing yourself. And I'm a classic case of reinvention, as I'm sure you read through my resume, which reads like a couple of chapters out of the Bible. I think it's about 6 or 7 pages in terms of a resume. But that's what I've chosen to do with my life. And that's constantly be challenged, constantly find opportunities that I felt that it was a stretch. I had to grow up to those opportunities. But in doing so, enjoying the process of growing. So I'm going to break my comments into two portions today. First is reinventing yourself, and the second is preparing for the future. So I'll talk about both and how they both come together. And it's very relevant and germane to you who are very young people, because I'm going to talk about where the world is going and where you'll find your place in that world. First of all, I'm a strong believer. If you change the way you look at things, then the things you look at change. As potential media professionals, I've been interviewed a lot of times, and often it's by people who have already done a homework, they're already directing my comments, they want to know where it's going. And I often throw them a zinger to change them up. And you should always do that for yourself as well. Remember, change is necessary. Change is a process of growth. Pain in growth is a rewarding process because it means you're challenged to do something far beyond your reach, but you are preparing to get there, like you are in this class. When I speak of you are not your circumstances, there's another area that goes with that, and that's part of reinventing yourself for the purpose of what I call Me Inc., Me Incorporated. I run my life, I run the process of my life like a company. I'm a businessman. I've been a businessman for over 40 years. So I understand the process of putting business plans together, which is what all businesses do. You just don't wing it. There's actually a process you go through to identify what your business is, where you want to take this business, what kind of value do you want to build in this business, where do you see it in 3 years, 5 years, 6 years. So I apply that same process of building a business plan to an individual, to chart your life, to actually look at where you're going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then back into it and figure out how you're going to get there. What are the necessary steps for you to reach your goal? Once again, if you don't choose a road to travel, any road will take you where you're going, but you may not like how you arrive. So take control and thus chart and strategize and build. Actually write down what you plan to do, how you plan to do it, when you plan to do it, what resources you're going to need to accomplish that. So that's the first step I want to leave you with, is about reinventing yourself. It's called Me Inc., like Me Incorporated. For my wife and I, it's Us Inc. How do we operate as a couple? How do we manage our careers? How do we manage our children? How do we interface with our children, with our friends? How do we find common interest so we continue to grow as a couple? How do we find those elements of our life that keeps the relationship exciting and new, and that we both benefit from having known one another and being the very best friends in the midst of what is a marriage? So that's very, very important. Building a personal wealth model is very important. And it didn't come to me in my process until I met my wife, which was very late in the process. As people always says, you must be a millionaire. I said many times over, I kept spending it. So I had to keep making it over and over again until I met my wife. You'll find a lot of people who talk about being very successful in their lives and that they want to be famous and rich, but they've not defined what rich is. So it's very important to build a value proposition in your life, which is wealth building. Because one of the things that, as I've traveled through my athletic life, my professional career as a businessman, are people who arrive at the end of their careers and they're basically broke. Now, how did that happen? After years and years of earning a great deal of money, years and years of a lot of recognition and acknowledgments for who you are, and you arrive at the end of your life when you should be able to look back and celebrate that, and you can't because you're trying to find a job to pay the bills, because you haven't managed your resources, your finances well. And I understand there's a few athletes in your class here as well, and athletes are notorious for it because you tend to be very spoiled. Your environment spoils you, people you know spoil you, so you figure it's going to last forever. You're always going to be the ruler of the universe. You're always going to be signing autographs. And one day that ends. And it doesn't end with, well, this is going to happen to you in a year and a half. It ends with you walking into the locker room and there's a pink slip. Guess what? You've been traded. Or guess what? They're not going to extend a contract to you. And in that moment, you become mortal. Because up to that point you were immortal, or you thought you were. So it's very important to build a value proposition. How are you going to take the resources you're earning today and make sure that when you're my age at 61, that they're going to serve you very, very well. Finally, transform education. Have you ever heard the term educated fool? Well, what that means is someone who has all the education in the world, but it's doing them no good whatsoever. They have not leveraged it for their benefit. They've not leveraged it for profit. They've not leveraged it to help other people. So it's important that education become knowledge, because people pay for knowledge. They won't pay you for your education. They'll pay you for what you learned, the value of what you learned. And in my business, that's what I do. I don't interview people for a job. I interview you for what's called a personal value proposition, and we'll talk about that. In other words, when you come to me, it's not that I'm going to pay you on the 1st and 15th of every month. My interview is very simple. If I invite you into my company, how is my company made better? How do you increase my share of market? How do you increase the revenues? If I'm number 3 in my market, how do you make me number 1? So as a consequence, a personal value proposition is something I would ask all of you to establish now and constantly revise that as things change, and they will change in your life. But keep your eye on the prize. What do you have to offer anybody? Whether it's your employee or your future partner. It goes to your personal life and your professional life. What do you have to offer that should make someone value you? So a personal proposition is very, very important. That ties back to Me Inc., which we'll get into in greater detail. My story is a very interesting one in the sense that I've come a very, very long way and done a number of things. Even my wife and I met in Europe. I was in Paris and I was traveling to the Swiss Riviera for the Montreux Jazz Festival, which is a 3-week-long music festival. And that's where I met my wife in Switzerland, on the Swiss Riviera. I've lived all over the world, traveled all over the world, and had some wonderful experiences. And I like to call it from Myers Street to Wall Street. Myers Street is where I was born. Myers Street's in Tucson, Arizona. It's where the desperately poor blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans lived. I was born in an environment, in a duplex, if you will, that was probably the size of this podium here. That's where we lived. It was adobe mud. They actually didn't have brick, they made the brick out of mud. I didn't have running water, and my family shared an outhouse with 3 other families. My father had gone up to the University of Arizona on an art scholarship, the first in his generation. His parents were illiterate, his parents' parents were illiterate, and my mother went off to college also on a scholarship to be an educator. Her parents were illiterate, her grandparents were illiterate as well. That's one of the things that's most poignant in my mind. I remember my mother every morning having to call them because they were going to come over and deliver their bills because they couldn't read them, or information they got in the mail, they couldn't read it. So my mother had to read that information. So they both went off to college with great hopes, but by the second semester or the first year, they had to drop out. And they dropped out because my mother was pregnant with me. So here you had a man who wanted to be an artist, who had to start digging ditches. And a woman who wanted to be an educator, she started scrubbing floors as a maid. Now the story could have ended there, but as a consequence of them having a game plan, it was their own Us Inc. My mother and my father, how do they move beyond their circumstances? They came to recognize they weren't their circumstances. They were better than their circumstances. Fast forward, by the time I graduated from college, my mother was the first woman of color to graduate from the University of Arizona's medical school, Professor Morris. My father was a partner in the company he dug ditches for. My father worked 3 jobs for 18 years without a day off because he felt the need to care for his family. Now, we could talk about that's a wonderful story and how we arrived there, but I have 2 younger brothers who have spent their entire life, one is passed, a wonderful man, but has spent their entire lives on the dark side. They controlled drug trafficking in southern Arizona for about 15 years. And as a consequence, their lives have been one of in and out of penal systems. The one that I lost, that I loved dearly, that I lost about 1.5 years, died of a preventable disease. But the way they lived their lives, as he told me once, you go to a doctor when you get shot. So the whole idea of checkups and things like this was far beyond anything they came to understand. They never worked a job, never paid income tax, and lived their lives, on the high side. So as a consequence, I had an opportunity to see both sides of life, and I chose the one that allowed me to be the best of me versus the worst of me. We all have 2 people that reside in us, the best of us and the worst of us. And every day you have to wake up and decide consciously, am I going to be the best version of me or the worst version of me? You have that control. And I do that every day. And my wife will tell you that I have visual reminders of what my thought for the day is going to be. How am I going to get motivated for the day? I have one simple sign, and it's in stickers, and when I shave, it's on the door, it can be on my steering wheel, so it'll remind me, and it's be amazing. That's my thought for every day, to be amazing. To do things over and beyond what is expected of me. Because unfortunately, growing up a person of color, not much was expected of me. And had I become nothing, they would have said, well, he was supposed to be nothing. So, be amazing. That's my point of great motivation. So I went from Myers Street to Wall Street. And I became so by, once again, being amazing. I became the first black president of my elementary school, the first black president of my junior high. I became the first banker in junior high. I became the first student body president of a high school that had 4,000 students. I was Kiwanis Board of the Year, the Optimum Board of the Year, president of the Mayor's Youth Council, president of the Governor's Council, and I went off to Arizona State. I was also a 3-sport All-American. But When I chose to go to college, it wasn't on all the scholarships that were pushed at me. My parents told me that in order to manage my life, maintain control of my life, I had to continue to pay for my life. And once you allow someone else to pay for that life, then you're on their dime. And they have expectations. They're paying you for a reason. So I had scholarships all over. I accepted none of them. I went off to Arizona State. I lived off campus in a community. I got a job at night. I worked in a hospital, the graveyard shift, in the autopsy room. I cleaned up after they did autopsies for the day. And that's a very nasty job when they're cutting people up all day long and then you come in at the end of the day to clean things, all right? When I went off to college, to be more than an athlete. Playing sports is just one of the things I did well. I wasn't going to be defined as an athlete. So it was just one of many things that I was very interested in and I did real well. As a consequence, I became president of my fraternity. And the senior year in college, there was a group called Procter & Gamble on campus, and they were recruiting them. There was a thing called affirmative action. That's when there were laws put in place to be sure that people of color and women were able to work in environments they'd never been invited into before. So I get a call from the Dean of Men to come to a career center. Number one, I didn't know where the career center was. I finally find out where the career center is. So I go the next day. He says, people named Procter & Gamble want to talk to you. So I walk to the career center. I open these doors. And on the left were a lot of white females in their suits, white blouses, little ties. On the right were a bunch of white males, dark suits, pinstripe, white shirts, sincere ties. And I walked through the door with dreadlocks, with multicolored rubber bands at the base of them, in a leather jacket, because in those days you wore the shingle jackets, that sort of thing, with the beads on them, that sort of thing, platform shoes, these big stove leg pants, my man bag, and I had I call it the hubris of youth. I had all the slacks I wore. They used to have little iron-on patches. You could iron them on, that sort of thing. So I bought a bunch of red ones, and I cut hearts on them, in them. And I put the hearts at the base of my zipper. So I had all my pants, I had a heart at the base of my zipper. So I walk in to interview with Procter & Gamble. Yeah, you're laughing, but the real funny part is I got the job. And you know what my interview was? He says, let's talk about, I see your successes. Let's talk about where you failed. What hasn't worked out for you as you thought it would? What are your disappointments in life and how did you overcome those disappointments? So that became my interview. And as a consequence, I got the job. So when I went to play ball in Denver, that's where I also worked for Procter & Gamble when I was there. As a consequence of these kinds of things, I've only filled out one job application in my entire life. Word of mouth has always gotten me that next opportunity, where I get a call in the middle of the night and someone says they've heard about you. And they're saying, would you like to come to work for us? We'd like to have you do one of 5 things or 6 things. So as a consequence, managing your reputation is the most valuable thing you have. And once it's tarnished, it's very difficult to recover. So know your name and your reputation is yours. Yours to manage, yours to cherish, yours to build value in. That's why I didn't become an athlete as other athletes were, because I would have to turn that over to someone called a coach. And I wasn't going to have that happen. I was going to manage my life from beginning to end. When Procter & Gamble did me the favor, and they did, and I did them the favor because I was good for the work, they sent me to a place called Denver, Colorado. And my territory was Wyoming and Montana. Places they had never seen a person of color, not even on television, because we weren't on television in those days. So it was programmed to fail. That, yeah, basically we have to have people of color and women in this company, but we're not going to let them succeed. So I was sent to Wyoming. As a consequence of the job I did in Wyoming, I was called by Charles Refson, the founder of Revlon. He hired me. After being with Revlon, I got called by Tom Watson, the founder of IBM. So this went on and on and on through my careers. People knowing that I could get a certain job, I was disciplined, I could make things happen. When I talk about reinventing oneself, my story is a case of constant reinvention. Who am I? What would make me a better person? What things do I need to do to build greater value in myself? Constantly reinventing myself. As a good friend of mine says, who built Telluride, a city, he says, Robert, what you have to do is get involved in everything and then fake it till they get to the part you know. That was very, very good advice. So I wasn't excluding myself from things that I wasn't comfortable with. I got in the middle of it and I faked it until they got to the part I knew. And then I shined. That's part of the reinvention. Reinventing yourself. We talk about my being a futurist. I'm involved in ventures of building new cities. Do you know in the next 55 years, 10,000 new cities will be built around the world? We're in the midst of the greatest migration and movement of people in the history of the world. I've had the good fortune of being able to work at Spaceport America, that's the new NASA, where Richard Branson is running that. It's built on Ted Turner's land. Ted Turner's the largest landowner in this country. And so they built it on one of his 100 by 50 mile pieces of property where he owns the town, owns the city, these sorts of things. So easy to do. And then Warren Buffett owns 10% of it. I work for Burlington Northern Railroad. They're building 15 new cities in 30 years. Have you heard of Songdo? That's the new Korean island. New city, completely technology. Masdar. And my venture was with a company called Living Planet. We're building Europe's first truly smart city. Star Wars stuff. All the homes built on infinite broadband, smart walls, voice-activated pods for cars, reusable energy, waste to energy. It just goes on and on and on. So as a consequence of those experiences, I've launched my own venture here in the United States called Boris Banerjee. And right now, knock on wood, and if it doesn't happen, I'll try something else. I'm raising $2 billion. I'm a poor black kid from Tucson, Arizona, and I'm raising $2 billion to build Coliseum City in Oakland. And who have I gone to? People I've built a reputation with over the last 40 years. They know I'm good for it. They know if they put $2 billion in my hand, I can be trusted. And most importantly, I'll give them a return on their investment. They'll make money on the money they give me. That's what a reputation can do for you. That's by knowing the right kinds of people, being the right kind of person yourself. Because good people don't associate with bad people. So you have to be worthy and right to associate with other people who are worthy and right. In your lifetime, you'll have anywhere from 7 to 12 jobs. My parents, 1 or 2 for their entire life. My generation, maybe 2 to 3 for their entire life. But you will be what, and write this down too, his name is Richard Florida. He wrote a book called The Emergence of the Creative Class. That's your generation, where you'll no longer get jobs as I knew jobs. It'll be on what you can create, what you can make happen. He suggests that each of you look at yourself as an economic unit. How do you pay for yourself? How do you manage yourself? How do you get through life? How do you build skills that'll underwrite that? I'm a very strong believer in the fact that you are the creative class. You will do things that previous generations had never done as a consequence of you being wired, that you're global already. You're in the midst of global interaction. You think globally. You don't think of your life as contained in San Francisco, and if you do, I want to suggest that you don't. That you're not a Californian, you're not in America, you're in a global, think of yourself in a global context. Because your job isn't waiting for you at Channel 2 in Oakland. It may be in China. It may be in France. It may be in Russia. It may be any number of places in the world. So prepare yourself to be global so you remain relevant. And once again, continue to reinvent yourself with greater and greater value. What's a personal value proposition? Starts with who you are, what you think you are worth. And then once you identify those two things, then you start to build on that value. If I think I'm worth X, then how do I support that sense of myself? I thought I was worth more than any amount of money could be calculated. So how do I act that valuable? How do I come forth with the kind of value that when I sit down and when someone says, well, we're thinking about you for a job, this is an interview. I said, yes, it is. I'm interviewing you. I don't know if I want to work here. Tell me why I should want to work here. You know why you want me to work here because you saw my resume, you saw my history, so you're convinced. Convince me. Why should I be a part of this company? That's control of your life. When I went into sports, I was my own agent. Why shouldn't I negotiate my own contract? Why should I pay someone 15 to 20% off the top to decide what's going to happen with my money? Many athletes do that, and all they want is a Maserati, a great sound system, and a penthouse somewhere. They don't know where their money is. They don't know what happens with their money because they've left it to someone else to manage their life. Someone now has reinvented you. You don't even sit with the owner. Someone else stands between you and the owner to decide what your life is going to be. So I negotiated my own contracts. Who knows what's best for me than me? My wife, Valerie. I negotiate her contracts. Who knows what's best for her more than she does? I do. We've been together 20 years. So when I sit down, I negotiate on her behalf. What's in her best interest? What works for Us Inc.? What's part of what builds value and supports Us Inc.? She Inc., me Inc., Us Inc. How does that work? Okay. How do we get a return on investment? How do we build this values with one another? I want to ask you to do 4 things if you do nothing else and leave you with these 4 things. First of all, build a personal value proposition. Secondly, think of yourself as an economic unit. Not who's going to take care of me, how do I take care of myself? And how do you do that for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? How do you get to where you want to arrive at? A roadmap. The structure of Me Inc., creating Me Inc. I'll be kind enough to provide Valerie with a business plan structure so you can build Me Inc. When I build business plans, when I want to go out and get $2 billion, I have to build a business plan that says, what is this? How does it work? What's the return on investment? How much money do I need? Where do I need to go? What relationships do I need to establish to get to where I'm going? So I'm going to give you that template. And finally, I want you to think of being mentored and mentoring. Find people that you respect. Find people who you acknowledge as having value propositions that you think are worthy. And ask them to mentor you. Now understand, mentoring is the process where you find someone who's got a lot of money and you want them to take you on. Now this isn't about being a sugar daddy, it's about being a mentor. So you've got to come correct. That is to say, when you come to me to mentor you, I have to figure out whether you're worthy of it. Whether or not I want to take this person or that person and download 40 years of knowledge and share it with you for free. So you have that responsibility once you find a mentor to be capable and responsible and worthy of being mentored. So in closing, you're at a wonderful time in your life. I can remember where, like I always say, like it was yesterday. No, it wasn't yesterday, it was 40 years ago. I sat where you're sitting in a similar environment, and I heard what people were saying, but I listened to what they were communicating. People will say, I always say, people will tell you anything if you let them. It's your responsibility to scrutinize. If someone tells you to jump off a building, maybe you should, but let it be your idea. Find out why it's a good idea to jump off the building. If someone tells you to go left versus right, well, determine whether you should do that or not. And understand, find good people. In my life now, 40 years later, I pick up a phone and I call people and I say, look, I've got this going on, I need some assistance. That person calls another person, this person calls another person, and before you know it, I have what I need. $2 billion was a phone call to someone who started the process. And as a consequence, the process came full circle, and I'm working on that now. Now, is it promised it will happen? No, it's not. Failure, understand, as in your life, 99% of all businesses fail. 1% succeeds. But of that 99% that fail, they go on to fail again because they keep trying, and trying. You can't win if you're not in the game. And if you're in the game, you can't win if you don't make an effort. So keep making the effort. So in closing, I'll give you the wish and the dreams and the hopes that my wife and I like to share with people. And it's for the rest of your lives. I wish you chocolate Saturdays and strawberry Sundays. Thank you for your time.
And our time, Reggie, for the break, we're shortening it. What time will we begin? The floor director, are we doing 10 minutes break?
Yeah, we can do 10, 15 minutes.
Call it 10.
10.
Because if you do 10, then people show up in 15.
Oh, no.
So,
They'll show up.
oh, that's right.
We will at 5:20, is that what we're not doing?
Yes.
10 minutes, yeah.
5:20, back in here, prepared for a news conference. Thank you.
I had someone else.
They could possibly be the most amazing couple in the world.
I know.
Quite possible.
Yeah.
Quite possible.